Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, which is going to be super useful this weekend, considering we got 7 total MMA events going down. Not only do we have UFC 299, but we also have PFL Europe 1, Aries FC 19, LFA 178, CFFC 130, ACA 172, and Fury FC 87, all which have been posted on the MMA Fight Archive for your studying pleasure. You can ensure that there are as many direct links to past fights for all the competitors competing on those upcoming cards so that you can make sure you leave no stone unturned when you're researching for these upcoming events. Utilize the 7-day free trial to check it out for free and see what all the hoopla is about. The link for that is in the description below. Make sure you guys take full advantage of it. All right, this weekend we got a big pay-per-view on hand going down in Miami, Florida. UFC 299 headlined by a bantamweight title fight between Sugar Sean O'Malley as he rematches the last person to hand him an official loss. That was Marlon Chito Vera back in 2021. And now they're scoring off once again as Sean O'Malley clearly wants to get that loss back and prove that he is the better fighter between the two. In the co-main event, we have a 5-round fight here between Dustin the Diamond Poirier as he takes on Benoit Saint-Denis, who has been smashing through competition over his last 5 fights, finishing every single one of them en route to this clash against a former interim champion and former multiple-time title challenger, Dustin Poirier. Again, very fun card from top to bottom, absolute bangers. There's been a lot of talk about how this fight or this card possibly tops UFC 300 in terms of intriguing and entertaining matchups. We'll find out after the fact once both pay-per-views have wrapped up, but this one definitely contends considering the amount of talent, former champions, former title challengers that are on the card, and very meaningful fights that are on this card as well. Title implications, contender implications, all of that stuff. And then obviously capping the night off with a bantamweight title fight with seemingly the UFC's cash cow and Sugar Sean O'Malley. All right, before we get into it, let's quickly recap this past weekend's series of events. The lock of the night does not come through with Shamil Gadzhiev crashing for us, even though we got him at minus 130 and he closed closer to that minus 180 range. CLV meant shit this weekend as Gadzhiev does go out there. Has a decent first round. You can make an argument that he won that second round, but it was clear the trend was on the downward slope for him as Rosenstrike was getting busy with his jab and then eventually forced Gadzhiev to quit on the stool after round 4. So we take an L there. We also take an L on our dog of the night play, which was Bernardo Sopai, who had a very flaming hot start for the first 6, 7, maybe even 8 minutes before he ended up getting reversed from that position that he was dominating from. And then we saw Lock Dog Vinicius Oliveira take over, smash him, and then eventually put a stamp on it with what could go down as the knockout of the year with that flying knee in the last 20 seconds of that matchup. So we take minus 1.5 units there. We also had a 3.44 unit parlay on 3.44 unit parlay on a parlay. Vitor Petrino, who obviously went out there and had relative easy work against Tyson Pedro, who didn't put up much of a fight, but then the Javid Bashrat leg ends up falling short as Ayman Zahabi goes out there and pulls off a massive upset. Now, obviously, Bashrat closed closer to minus 900. When we put the parlay together, he was closer to minus 500. So, minus 171 all in all for 2 guys that I felt were pretty good shoe-ins to win their matchups. They end up crashing the bucket for us there. And then the only dub on the night, which was originally the dog of the night play, but unfortunately that is not the case after Bernardo Sopai jumped on the card. I felt he was the better underdog to be confident in, but we did have Loik Radzhabov kick off the card in a good way for us, cashing at plus 142. Unfortunately, that was the only bright spot on the night for the UFC. Luckily, Octagon MMA was there to save the day in terms of cutting the loss in half. The lock of the night over there hit for us in Mohamed Machaev as he goes out there and spoils the octagon debut of Makwan Amirkhani. And then we had a couple other plays that ended up hitting for us that, again, allowed us to not completely be shit out of luck compared to what the L's that we took on the UFC card. So regional, just as important as the UFC for us, so that we can go out there and try to have a solid overall weekend rather than just focusing on the UFC. But obviously UFC is the focal point of the content that I drive to you guys, so we definitely got to do better than what we did last week. So just a quick recap: lock of the night plays now fall to 10-8 on the year for a 55% hit rate. Again, far cry from last year, absolute far cry from last year. So we really need to get things back on track in regards to those. And then the dog of the night falls to 6-13 for a 32% hit rate. Another, slight deficit there considering the underdog odds that we've been getting, but still not where I want to be, just starting the third month of the year. All right, let's quickly plug the Locky two-step, which went 5 or is now 5-2. We did end up losing last week with a Shamil Gadziev not completing it for us. Obviously, the Locky Trinity also falls to 3-4. Still in the profit for both of those parlays. Let's see if we can get back on the winning track this weekend. Reminder, I drop it to the Patreon folks first and foremost on Mondays so that they can get the best price possible, because I drop it on Thursdays to the public as a segment for free here on YouTube, but usually the odds are much worse by then. So if you want to get an early taste of what the Locky Trinity and Locky Two-Step is all about, make sure you guys check it out on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that is in the description below. And then lastly, shout out to the guys over there at Godzilla Wins, where I'm able to put out public articles for you guys to dig into. On Wednesdays, we drop the main event breakdowns, and then on Thursdays, we drop the 3 best money line spots, so you guys can see where my eyes are for those matchups in terms of just taking straight shots. Again, shout out to Godzilla Wins, not just for MMA, but they have you guys covered for all other sports. Make sure you guys check it out. They're in the thick of the March Madness season now, so if you guys want to check out NCAA plays, they got you guys covered over there as well. All right, that is enough of teeing you guys up for this UFC 299 breakdown. So we got 14 fights to get through. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. First fight of the night that we got is going to be between, it's actually a rematch between Joanne Wood, who comes in at plus 190, as she takes on Marina Moroz, who comes at minus 225. Now, we'll start off on the Joanne Wood side, who was able to snap a 3-fight losing streak last time around as she picked up a split decision victory over Luana Carolina last year in London. That was a solid performance from her, showcasing that the 38-year-old still has some bite to her and she can go out there and put together a solid game plan and execute it. What she utilized in that matchup was a lot of forward movement, some output, and then occasionally engaging in the clinch, where she was able to push Carolina up against the cage and land some elbows, land some knees, some dirty boxing, and get some damage off so that she can get back out into the open cage, get back to her combination striking, and then engage in the clinch once again. She was rinsing, repeating that game plan until she was able to get the decision victory there. Now, I did go to a split, but I'm not sure what the dissenting judge was seeing, considering that I believe that a lot of people suspected that Wood deserved to win that fight no matter what. I thought she did enough work throughout all 15 minutes there, showcasing that she was in the driver's seat and landing enough damage to get her hand raised, but only 2 of the judges saw it for her. Luckily, she was still able to get her hand raised. Her opponent this weekend, Marina Moroz, was on a 3-fight winning streak that got snapped by Jennifer Maia back in November of 2022, and now she finds herself on a 2-fight losing streak, as she did end up losing a rematch that she had against Karine Silva last time around. She had defeated Silva back in 2014 with an armbar, and then she ended up getting choked out with less than a second left on the clock in the first round of their fight. She seemed to be a little bit in the driver's seat there. She was able to get some top time, some top control, but then she ended up falling into a submission and getting choked out there. Now, Moroz is a decent striker from distance, but what made her so successful during her 3-fight winning streak was her knack for going out there and utilizing a grapple-heavy approach. It was weird to see her not look to utilize that against Jennifer Maia, as she went out there and got outstruck through the first 10 minutes and then really started to pour it on in the third round, but unfortunately, it was too little too late for her. Moroz is a solid striker, again, like I said, but she does her best work when she's able to implement a grapple-heavy approach. She's really good from that top position, controlling the position and doing some good damage from that top position. But when she does get a little bit lackadaisical like she did against Cardine Silva, she can be caught in submissions. Now, both these women met back in 2015 when both women were undefeated. I believe Marina Moroz was only 5-0 and Joanne Calderwood was 9-0, and she did suffer an exhibition loss technically on The Ultimate Fighter to Rose Namajunas, but they were still very young in their MMA careers. Joanne Wood was actually minus 900 that night, and Moroz seemed to take offense to that as she really put the heat on her from the jump. Eventually got the fight to the ground where she pretty much jumped guard, knowing that she was going to go for the armbar. And she successfully launched onto it and got the submission there. Now, Moroz is obviously not a plus 500 underdog anymore in this matchup as she comes in at minus 225. I suspect that if she does go back to her grapple-heavy approach, she could be successful here against Joanne Wood. Wood might have the advantage in terms of volume and output on the feet, but I think that we'll see Moroz push the pace enough here, similar to their initial meeting. And I think that it will eventually lead to her looking to drag this fight to the ground where she should be able to overwhelm the aging and soon to be retired Joanne Wood. Quickly just talking about that, Wood has talked about retiring in the next year or two, and especially with her getting up there in age, got to believe that she's on the downside now. Again, good performance against Solana Carolina, but Carolina will probably not be able to provide as much resistance as Marina Moroz as long as Moroz is dialed in. So minus 225 is a little bit wide for me, as it's been difficult to completely trust Moroz to go out there and implement her effective style. But if she does, she should look the minus 225. So give me Moroz and Moroz by decision. Next up, we got a flyweight bout here between CJ Vergara, who comes in at minus 350. He's going up against Asu Almabaev, who comes in at minus 450. Now, Vergara is a guy that I believe is overachieving a little bit in the UFC, especially with his last win over Vinicius Salvador. Now, he was the favorite going into that matchup, but we saw when Salvador was dialed in that first round that he could get off on the better strikes and land the better damage, and he won that round on all three judges' scorecards. But that's when Vergara really seemed to dial it in himself, and Salvador got a little bit too cocky, was gesturing a little bit too much, posing too much, allowing Vergara to get up on numbers, landing more damage, and just running away with that fight down the stretch and winning that fight on the scorecards. Vergara is mainly a Muay Thai fighter that likes to go out there and implement a consistent leg kicking game and then open up with combination striking whenever he sees the opportunity to crash the pocket, blitz forward, and land 2, 3, 4 punch combinations and stamp it with a leg kick afterwards as well. His ground game is definitely the biggest flaw in his game, but he is continuously trying to work on it, trying to work on the defensive aspect of it, not only from getting taken down, but even once he does hit the ground, working back to his feet to nullify any type of advantages his opponents will have over him in that realm. His opponent this weekend, Asu Almabaev, made a dominant UFC debut back in August where he finished O'Day Osborne in the second round of their matchup by submission. Almabaev is a very hot prospect right now who is very solid all around, but it's obvious that the best work that he's able to do is when he's able to get fights to the mat. I think that this is a similar spot where he should be able to have success in terms of getting the fight to the mat and dominating from that top position. His striking is mainly just power punching, looking to try to knock his opponent out on the feet, or at least looking to just crash that pocket with the big power so that he can eventually change levels and get the fight to the ground. I'm very impressed with his ability to chain wrestling attempts and takedown attempts together, as he's been very effective in terms of grabbing that lead leg of his opponents, transitioning it to a body lock, and eventually dragging his opponents to the ground after that. He's very solid once he gets a hold of his opponents, especially in that body lock position, and when he is able to utilize trips and just dragging his opponents to the ground, utilizing, like I said, that body lock and that trip. The inside trip is a big weapon of his to get his opponents to the mat, and then eventually from there, work to more dominant positions and secure finishes. I expect him to be successful with that here with Vergara. Vergara is a decent striker and may even be better, technically speaking, here in the striking realm, but I don't think he provides enough power that's going to cause Almabaev a lot of issues in terms of keeping him at bay. I expect Almabaev to drag this fight to the ground, dominate from that top position, and secure another submission victory. Next up in the heavyweight division is the highly anticipated debut of Robelis Despaigne, or Despaigne, I believe his name is, going up against Jos Parisian. Now, highly touted debut, like I said, by Despaigne, who comes in at minus 320. This guy is a bronze medalist in the 2012 Olympics for Taekwondo, and that's clearly on display whenever you see him fight, considering the speed and dexterity in the kicking game that you see of him, but you don't really see much of him considering his last 3 fights have accumulated for only 19 seconds of cage time. His first fight went almost the full 5 minutes of the first round, but he was able to eventually get that finish in the last couple seconds there, but he did get held up against the cage against an opponent that was just making his debut as well. But over his next 3 fights, he was able to quickly dispatch of his opponents. I believe it was 13 seconds, 4 seconds, and then 3 seconds. Absolutely insane power and speed that he showcases. But he is also getting up there in age. I believe he's 36 or 37 years old, and I believe he has not been tested against guys that are going to be able to push him and not get finished so quickly. It was not encouraging to see how easily he was getting held up against the cage. Although he did showcase good enough takedown defense, you still have to wonder what the level of his opponent's takedowns were that he was getting held up against the cage against. Again, he shows insane speed for a heavyweight. Somebody that can land on the chin with such precision and power is definitely the keys to him winning his fights, but he's definitely going to get extended in a lot of his UFC fights, and you got to wonder how he's going to look doing that. Like, is this going to be a Derek Lewis type situation where if he's in the stand-up realm long enough, he'll eventually be able to find the chin? Or is this going to be a case of he has that one shot at the beginning of the round to try to knock his opponent out? Otherwise, his opponents can wrap him up against the cage, drag him to the ground where he could end up being useless. There's just not enough film on him to be completely confident, especially coming in at minus 320 against a guy that has 4 or 5 times the experience of him in the MMA world. Again, kickboxing, taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, all of that is great, but the mixed martial arts platform is much different than when you're just focusing on one martial art specifically. Now, flipping over to the Josh Parisian side at plus 260, a decent start for Despaigne to come into the UFC and try to challenge himself against a guy that has historically had some good durability. Parisian is a guy that likes to march forward, bring his lunch pill to the octagon, and try to really hurt his opponents with some good pressure and good forward movement. He has good power in his hands, a good grind, a good ability to push his opponents up against the cage and look to drag them to the mat, and then do some good work from up there, or from down there. But again, is a guy that can be grinded out himself, a guy that's pretty much holding on to a UFC roster spot at this point in time. But I think it's a good test for a guy in Rubeles who's still trying to figure out, if he's actually that good or not, or if he's just been going out there and deading competition, who's been a little bit too lackadaisical early in fights. I could see this fight being a test for Rubeles, which is why I have no confidence in taking that chalky spot on him. But I can't muster up the confidence to bet Parisian either. I do have to, just by principle, kind of just lean on the Parisian side here and pick him to win this matchup by being able to grind this fight out up against the cage, hopefully land some takedowns and do some good work from that top position to wear on Rubeles and really start to slow him down. But it's all going to be those first couple minutes or first couple seconds of each round that Parisian is going to have to navigate correctly. And as long as he can get that cage grind on, which is something we know he's capable of doing, he is absolutely live to win this fight. So I think it's hard to be completely confident in the under, which is minus 250. Hard to be completely confident in Rubeles at minus 320, considering the lack of tape against legitimate competition he has. Experience normally outweighs guys that have just been running through guys on the regional scene. I don't know. Again, this is heavyweight, so maybe the power is something that's a little bit more effective, a little bit more reliable, but I still believe that Parisian has a shot to go out there and win this fight. So I likely won't be betting on Parisian here, but I will make him my prediction. I think he has enough experience and he has enough tools to make this a tough UFC debut for Rubeles. So give me Parisian and Parisian by decision. All right, next up in the middleweight division, I'm very excited for this one because this one should be very fun. We got Michel Pereira coming in at minus 150, going up against Michal Oleksiejczuk, who comes in at plus 130. We'll start off on the Pereira side, who's on a crazy 5 or 6 fight winning streak now, and most recently defeated Andre Petroski in the first round of their matchup. Pereira is a guy that came into the UFC as a spark, a firecracker, a guy that just goes out there, utilizes super, athletic, erratic and unorthodox moves, flashy moves to try to knock his opponents out. And then we saw when he is unable to get off on that type of style, he starts to slow down and his opponents are able to take over. But he has matured a lot through his UFC career, which is why he's been able to put together 6 straight victories. He's utilizing his power more effectively now. He's using his speed, his footwork, and his just ability to close the pocket with such power to his advantage. He's able to hurt his opponents and either finish them or at least go out there and win decisions now. You know, in the third round, obviously, he does not have as much pop as he does early in fights, but he stays busy enough that it still looks good enough for the judges that he's not getting completely squashed in those third rounds, but even having an argument to potentially winning those third rounds as well. His ground game is definitely something that still needs improving, but a lot of opponents have been finding it difficult to drag him to the ground, considering his footwork and ability to pivot off from bad positions. His opponent this weekend, Oleksiejczuk, is probably one of my favorite middleweights, considering how much this guy brings it at all times. This guy marches forward, looks to drown his opponents with his pressure, and mixes up his targets very well with his boxing, eventually breaking his opponents and finishing them. This guy's durability is off the chain as well, as I've seen him eat some very clean shots from opponents in the past, but he continues to march forward and then eventually break them and eventually finish them. He does, it's surprising to me that his first, I believe it was 8 fights, his first 8 fights in the UFC were at light heavyweight, and he was completely outsized in every single one of them, but still managed to put together a 4-3-1 no contest record. But after he ended up losing, I believe, to Dustin Jacoby, I think he finally decided that he needs to go down to middleweight, and he looks like a completely different fighter, physically speaking. But he still goes out there and implements the style that has made him so successful. Forward movement, pressure, boxing, and trying to knock his opponents out. I have to lean with the Oleksiejczuk side here, as I believe that his durability will allow him to kind of just wade through the early threat that Pereira normally implements in his fights, and from there I think that Oleksiejczuk will start to catch up with Pereira, start to corral him against the cage, start letting loose with his combinations, and I think one of those punches will eventually start to drop Pereira, whether it's to the body, whether it's to the head. I expect Oleksiejczuk in the second or third round to finally get a finish. This will be an entertaining matchup. This will be a nail biter of a spot, especially if you're looking to take the shot on Oleksiejczuk early in this matchup. But the more seconds that take off the clock here, the more confidence we can start building on the Oleksiejczuk side. So I'm gonna go Oleksiejczuk. I'm gonna go Oleksiejczuk late. But this might even be one of those spots where taking Oleksiejczuk live might be safer than betting him pre-fight, because there is that possibility that Pereira could stop him early here. But for the most part, we've seen great durability from Oleksiejczuk, and hopefully that can continue to will him to a victory in this matchup against Pereira. So give me Oleksiejczuk and Oleksiejczuk by knockout. Next up, we have a fight between Philippe Lins, who's coming in at plus 110, going up against Iwan Cutelaba, who comes in at minus 130. Now, this is a matchup that was originally scheduled to take place back in October, but on fight night, Philippe Lins was not medically cleared to take the cage, and they were forced to postpone the fight, and now here they are this weekend, knock on wood that they can actually throw down. Now, Philippe Lins is a guy that's on a 3-fight winning streak since moving down to light heavyweight, and it seems like this is the move he should have made since he jumped to the UFC. He had some issues in the heavyweight division, but has shown that he can be effective at light heavyweight. He has good power that was being brought down from the heavyweight division, but his ability to mix in the clinch and wear on his opponents up against the cage has been very effective for him as well, considering how strong and powerful he is when he gets to those spots. He has decent durability, he has good knockout power of his own, but he has the ability to go 15 minutes if that's what's required, and I think that this is another case that we can see him showcase a full mixed martial arts arsenal for him to get a victory. He's going up against Iwan Cutelaba, who normally goes out there and relies on knocking his opponents out early. He's tried the grapple heavy route against a couple of opponents, but it's not really come to fruition, causing him to slow down and leaving openings for opponents to take advantage of him, and I think that's kind of been his downfall. He's been a fun and an entertaining fighter throughout his career, but it's just his skill set is just not top 5, top 8 in the UFC light heavyweight division, which causes him issues against guys that are able to thwart the power that he brings to the table, or who are able to thwart the wrestling background that he tries to implement, which causes him to slow down and eventually be vulnerable, gas out, and be finished. And that's exactly what I'm expecting Philippe Lins to be successful with here. Now, the first time these guys were matched up back in October, Lins closed as as a plus 130 underdog, but it seems like something has changed and people are starting to see the Lynn side here, which is why he's down to plus 110. I could be wrong. Come fight time, maybe he balloons back up to plus 130, but I think he should be the favorite in this matchup. I think Linz is far more skilled overall, which would allow him to go out there and put the pressure on Cutelaba, roll with the big shots that Cutelaba tries to land in return, and then wear on him in the clinch, really grind on him, slow him down, and then let Philippe Lins go out there and do Philippe Lins things. I think that we're going to see Lins, like I said earlier, showcase his full mixed martial arts arsenal here, grind on Cutelaba, and end up picking up the victory by decision. Not a bad underdog spot for this UFC 299 card. All right, let's move on to the next fight here. We got bantamweights going at it as we have Pedro Munhoz coming in at plus 215. He takes on Kyler Phillips, who comes in at minus 255. Now, Pedro Munhoz has fought the who's who at bantamweight and never turns down any opportunity that he has to fight a top 5, top 10, top 15, or even unranked opponent so that he can prove that he deserves to be at the top of the division. This is a guy who is a BJJ black belt, but never really relies on that unless he's able to knock down his opponent, or his opponent looks to take him to the ground and he latches onto a guillotine, which is one of his classic moves. But he often just looks to march his opponents down, landing his big strikes with his hooks, and even landing some calf kicks to try to slow his opponents down. We saw him actually win the first round on 2 judges' scorecards against now champion Sugar Sean O'Malley, until that unfortunate eye poke in the second round caused the fight to go to a no contest. He even had a solid case to have won that fight against Marlon Vera last time around, as a lot of people thought he did good enough work in the first 2 rounds to end up getting his hand raised. It was a tough one because you got Pedro moving forward, but Marlon landing some good strikes from his back foot, and that's usually the issue that Pedro runs into. When he's fighting guys that are technically better than him in the striking realm and have good enough footwork to kind of evade that forward pressure that Pedro normally implements, he usually finds himself getting touched up from that long-range distance that his opponents are able to maintain, considering the short reach and short nature of Pedro Munhoz overall. I personally think Munhoz would benefit from trying to look for more takedowns and trying to utilize his BJJ black belt, but he's content with just going out there and throwing strikes. And, it's worked out for him against guys like Chris Gutierrez, who a lot of people believe technically is a better striker, but it seems like Gutierrez fell victim to the constant forward pressure and just power that Munhoz was able to land on him. His opponent this weekend, Kyler Phillips, is coming off the biggest win of his career, or one of the biggest ones of his career, after he went out there and defeated Raoni Barcelos by decision. And this is a guy that could be in that ranking had it not been for the minor bump that he took against Raulian Paiva a couple fights back. That was a fight, if you guys remember, where he had big success in that first round, nearly finishing Paiva on numerous occasions, but then fell victim to his gas tank management in that fight and saw Paiva run away with the next 2 rounds and Paiva winning that fight by decision. But Phillips is a guy who has constantly had cardio issues throughout his career. If you look back at a lot of his scorecards that have gone to a decision, it's not often that you see him win that 3rd round, but he still has been improving in the fact that he stays safe enough and competitive enough in that 3rd round that he doesn't get 10-8 or he doesn't get finished. He's a guy that utilizes a lot of movement from that distance range, where he's able to just touch his opponents up with his speed and his blitz attacks. But he also has a decent ground game. I believe he's a BJJ black belt as well, where he's able to take fights to the ground and do some good work from on top while he's able to rest, catch his breath, and also try to get to dominant positions where he could potentially find a finish. We saw in the Barcelos fight, another fight where he looked like he was slightly slowing down in that 3rd round, which is why Barcelos was able to win that 3rd round on at least 2 judges' scorecards. But Phillips does more than enough work in the first 2 rounds for him to get his hand raised. We've seen him try to implement some grappling in the 3rd round that didn't really come to fruition, but that's usually the best way for him to try to get fights to the ground where he can just catch his breath, get some wind back into his lungs so that he can see the fight through to the judge's decision. This kid's very talented, very skilled. I just think that the 5-round nature of whenever he ends up fighting 5 rounds will come back to bite him in the ass unless he continues to try to improve his gas tank management. Now, this matchup, I think, is a perfect stylistic matchup for Phillips to kind of dance around at range and touch up Pedro Munhoz with the speed advantage, footwork advantage, and technical striking advantage he'll hold, which should allow him to at least win the first 2 rounds and then survive that 3rd round to pick up another decision victory. The line is a little bit wide, especially when you consider the amount of high-level experience that Pedro Munhoz has, his ability to just continuously walk forward, maybe even land calf kicks that could slow down Phillips. But I think Phillips' movement, his ability to kind of just see the kicks coming, will allow him to either check the kicks or get out of the way and then just get back to his handiwork of touching Munhoz up down the pipe. That should be enough for him to make it look better optically for the judges so that he can get his hand raised on the scorecards. I am seeing the line come down a little bit now, so there is some Pedro Munhoz love coming in. If we can continue to get that line down, I would be more comfortable taking Phillips in that high minus 180 range rather than the mid minus 200 range that he currently finds himself at. But I do like Phillips here. I think he puts on a similar performance to what he did against Barcelos. Movement, speed, output, first 2 rounds, and then do enough to survive in that 3rd round and pick up his 3rd straight win by decision. All right, moving over to the next fight here in the lightweight division, we got Matthias Gamrot coming in at minus 400. He's going up against Rafael dos Anjos, who comes in at plus 330. Now, starting off on the Gamrot side, he had his 4-fight winning streak snapped back in October of 2022 against Benio Dariush. That was a fight that he was unable to get his grappling going, and Dariush was able to outdamage him, especially in the last 2 rounds, and we saw Gamrot take a defeat that night. But Gamrot has bounced back with 2 straight wins, one of them being a split decision over Jalen Turner, a very close fight that could have gone either way, but it seemed like the judges were favoring the control and takedowns that Gamrot was able to land. And then the next fight, he fell short in that first round against Rafael Fiziev, but it seemed like his grappling was slowly starting to come on, but unfortunately, we saw Fiziev sustain a knee injury that allowed Gamrot to get his hand raised by TKO that night. Gamrot is still a very solid fighter. Gamrot's still a guy that can go out there and get high-level wins. He's only 20-2, if I'm not mistaken, with his record overall, but he is a guy that is very good in terms of implementing his grappling. It's very weird to see him try to go out there and snatch up the lead leg of his opponent and then turn that into a takedown, whether it's like raising that leg up over their opponent's head and then getting them off balance and pushing them over and getting on top, or even just taking that single leg ankle pick, transitioning it to a body lock, to a double leg, to a single leg, whatever it is, and then eventually getting his opponents down and then getting to work with his grappling. Very high level in that aspect. His striking is a lot of just flash, a lot of kicks to try to just close that distance to eventually, get you thinking about something so that he can dip down and pick up that leg of yours. But it's his grappling normally that gets him his wins. His opponent this weekend, Rafael dos Anjos, former lightweight champion, a guy that has pretty much faced everybody, similar to Pedro Munhoz, who we just spoke about. Rafael dos Anjos has likely fought every, high-level lightweight that you could think of over the last 10 years. Absolutely insane what this man has been able to do. But he's getting closer to the end of his career, right? He will be 40 by the end of the year. We saw him get completely out-grappled by a guy that normally utilizes striking last time around in Vicente Luque. Luque was able to land 8 takedowns and control him for 11 minutes out of the 25 that they were competing against each other. And dos Anjos, what he was good at was, mixing in takedowns behind his striking, not working out for him so much as of late, especially with him slowly starting to slow down. His opponents obviously just being too good for him at this point in his career. It's a sad sight to see, but he knows that he's on his last legs here, and this potential loss could end up being all he needs to realize, okay, I can't compete at this level anymore. But Gamrot, more than worthy at minus 400 here. I think he's going to be too strong, too fast, obviously younger, and the better overall wrestler here, which will allow him to get this fight to the ground and just wear on dos Anjos and grind him out here. If dos Anjos was a couple years younger, I think he'd be worth a shot at this price, but I think he's just showcased that his takedown defense is not what it used to be, and that Gamrot is just going to be just grinding on him, just working him, just pressuring him constantly, and will eventually be able to pick up that decision victory. I'd be honing in more so on Gamrot by decision, as I think it's going to be hard for him to finish a guy like dos Anjos. But give me anything better than minus 140, because I think that would probably be the best way to go about it. Considering what the lines currently stand at with the over 2.5 and Gamrot's money line, I'd be surprised if we get anything better than minus 150 on Gamrot by decision, but I think that's going to be the best way to attack this fight without taking too much chalk on anything you pull the trigger on. Next up, we have the return of Katlyn Cerminara. I believe it's Cerminara or Cerminara, but you guys knew her as Chookagian. She makes her return and she comes in as a plus 185 underdog to Macy Barber, who comes in at minus 220. Now, the last time we saw it, I want to say Chookagian so bad because I'm so used to it, but I'll go with Catlin just so I can like stick with something that was regular for me back in the day. Catlin, last time we saw her was UFC 280 back in October of 2022, where she came up short against Manon Fiorot. Now, in that matchup, she had a very solid first round where she was able to utilize her output and her normal style to try to get her hand raised. But unfortunately for her, Fiorot came on strong in the second and third rounds, landing the heavier shots and was able to pick up the decision victory that night. Catlin is a fighter that, in that matchup was fighting somebody that was pretty much the mirror image of her, but somebody that was able to land with strikes and shots that were much more powerful than what the stinging shots of Catlin normally end up doing. But Catlin is a fighter that's very live to go out there and always get the victory. Her style is reliable in the fact that we know what she's going to do. She's going to go out there. She's going to stay busy with her jab, her kick up the middle. She's going to constantly be moving, and it's going to be hard for her opponents to get a read on her. That's why she's been able to, pick up the victories that she has. That's why she was ranked the number one flyweight, even in that matchup against Manon Fiorot, because she's very difficult to deal with. And even though she's getting up there in age, this is still a fighter that I believe that is capable of getting high level wins. She's been out of the cage now for over a year and a half due to, I believe, getting married and enjoying a little bit of time off, but now getting back to business. They're giving her a streaking fighter that she's hoping that she can derail and potentially find herself in title talks once again, especially considering that there is a new face of the division with Alexa Grasso at the top. Now, she's going up against Macy Barber, who's currently on a very solid winning streak. I believe it's a 6-fight winning streak or a 5-fight winning streak. But Barber continues to showcase improvements in her own way. She's had a couple of decisions on that during this run that have been a little bit controversial, mostly the Miranda Maverick fight, which started this winning streak for her, but she is showing solid improvements. She's setting up her big shots. She's implementing some grappling as well, some clinching, utilizing her physicality, not so much just with her power, but with her ability to control opponents, put them in uncomfortable positions, and try to take advantage of that as well. But she has shown an ability to get taken down and controlled at times. I think fighters with better control will be able to keep her there and, make her almost useless off of her back. But she's been showing improvements in terms of her urgency with working back to the cage, looking to get back to her feet and getting back to her damage-based style with her striking approach. But in this matchup, I don't know if she should be such a big favorite. I get it. Catlin has been out for a while. Barber looks like she's streaking right now, but I believe Catlin has the chops to go out there and pull off an upset. She should be able to utilize her style that she's been famous with, which is just staying on the outside and utilizing her output. Obviously, she's going to have to eat a couple shots from Barber, and as long as they don't either, land hard enough to knock her out or land hard enough to cause some visible damage, the output and the optics of Chookagian, or yes, I'm going to say Chookagian. Chookagian's style should allow her to get up on the numbers, to get up on the optics, to make it look better for the judges for this fight that I expect to end up hitting the scorecards. So yeah, Barber had a more impressive performance last time around, especially with the way that she was able to finish Amanda Hebos. That might be playing into this, minus 220 line, some of that recency bias, but I think that Chookagian is still capable of going out there and having a veteran type of performance. So look for Chookagian to do her thing, go out there, touch up Barber from distance, and pick up a decision victory. Moving on to the next fight, we got Curtis Blaydes coming in at minus 120, going up against Jailton Almeida, who comes in at plus 100. Now, this fight was originally scheduled for November, and we saw Blaydes closer to plus 160, plus 170 that night, but Blaydes was forced to pull out. In stepped Derek Lewis, and one of the more unthinkable things last year happened, and that was Jailton Almeida being forced to go a full 25 minutes to defeat Derek Lewis. He landed all the takedowns he needed. I think he even got 21 minutes of control time that night, but was unable to finish Derek Lewis, which is absolutely mind-boggling. Now, with the Blaydes fight being put back together, we're seeing Almeida as the underdog at plus 100, as a lot of people took a lot of stock from that poor performance from Almeida last time around and believe it's not going to be able to save him in this matchup against Curtis Blaydes. Now, Blaydes, he's lost to Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, and Sergey Pavlovich. outside of that, he goes out there and fights like a guy that deserves to be heavyweight champion. He has strong wrestling. We know that's the bread and butter of his game. He's been trying to improve his striking game so that he can hide his takedowns more behind it. And we saw him get so comfortable in the striking realm that he actually ended up knocking out Chris Daukaus a couple fights back. But it's just his fight IQ against guys that have crazy knockout power, which has caused him some issues. He did attempt in a takedown against Sergey Pavlovich. We'll give him that, but he just played a little bit too long, a little bit too lackadaisical in the striking, and that ended up getting him knocked out last time around. But this is a guy that's still young enough to go out there and make a run to the top. He has the skill set. He has the wrestling. He just needs to make better decisions against guys that have knockout power, even if it means just continuously moving laterally on the outside, landing a kick every now and then waiting for his opponent to get frustrated so that he can change levels and get the takedown. Things like that could possibly help his game. But we know once he's able to get his wrestling going, he's one of the best to ever do it in the heavyweight division in terms of controlling his opponents on the mat and dishing out damage from that top position. Now, his opponent this weekend, Jailton Almeida, is a guy that has has implemented his own wrestle and grapple heavy approach to damage his opponents from that top position and finish all of them, with the exception of Derek Lewis last time around. Almeida is typically a light heavyweight, but has said that there have been a lot of opponents that do not want to fight him, and he's had a lot of pullouts, which is why he's just decided to go to heavyweight, so he doesn't have to worry about cutting weight and getting back down to 205 pounds. And it's been successful for him thus far. But now he's fighting somebody that's going to cause him legitimate issues. A guy that could potentially showcase that maybe Almeida deserves to be at light heavyweight. This could be the fight. Almeida is not a guy that is known for his one-punch knockout power. Almeida is a guy that takes his opponents to the ground and smashes them from that top position. Can he take Curtis Blaydes down? Maybe he can. But can he hold him down? Can he put him in compromising positions that will open up finishing opportunities for Almeida? I don't think so, which is why I don't mind this -120 line on Curtis Blaydes. Coming into researching this matchup, I really expected to be on the Almeida side, but when you run the tape, Blaydes should have the advantages in this matchup. Blaydes should be able to drag this fight to the ground or at least stop the takedowns of Almeida, hopefully utilize his footwork, land some good strikes from the outside, and then eventually open up a takedown opportunity of his own and go out there and grind this fight out. -120 is a great line on a fighter in Curtis Blaydes who has normally found himself as a chalky favorite. So give me Curtis Blaydes and Curtis Blaydes by decision. All right, I believe we are now kicking off the main card, which just has banger after banger, although the prelims had some pretty solid bangers itself. But we kick it off in the bantamweight division as we have Petr Yan coming in at -115, going up against the streaking Song Yadong, who comes in at -105. Now, if you told me that a few years ago, Petr Yan will eventually be on a 3-fight losing streak, I'd say you're full of shit. But that is now what we currently find ourselves on. He has been on the losing end of 2 split decision losses. And then last time around, got completely outworked by Merab Dvalishvili, who likely fights the winner of the main event for the next title shot. Yan is a guy that has usually walked a very fine line with his low output striking style, but he's been able to land with such power and emphasis and even finish some opponents, which has really bailed him out in past fights. The one fight that I like to kind of lean on and reference to, and it's been a couple years now, but the Jimmy Rivera fight. Jimmy Rivera was winning most of those rounds up until the last 30 seconds when Petr Yan was able to hurt him badly, and then Yan was able to swing that round back into his favor. But he needs those big moments for him to end up getting his wins. He's a great striker. He has a phenomenal amount of power and ability to put combinations together and hurt his opponents. He has a good enough wrestling game as well to take fights to the ground if he needs to. But he just doesn't do enough sometimes, and that's enough for opponents to just take a mile from him, take an inch from him, and that could end up being the difference maker. The Sean O'Malley fight, perfect example. The Aljamain Sterling fight, perfect example. Say what you want about Petr Yan deserving to win those fights. He put himself in those positions to not make it more resounding in his favor. He needs to just up the volume a little bit more, especially early in fights. A 5-rounder, he's great. 5 rounds allows him to go out there and work into fights and eventually start to take over in deep waters. But in 3-round fights and 15-minute fights, he often doesn't do enough for himself early, which ultimately puts him in these bad positions. Now, his opponent this weekend, Song Yadong, is a guy that's been absolutely streaking, going out there and having solid performances in main events. We saw him go out there and finish Ricky Simón in the 5th round of a fight that he was completely dominating. We saw him take Chris Gutierrez to a decision and even utilize the grapple-heavy approach late in that fight to try to, just be safe enough. But he was winning every single aspect of that fight. This kid came into the UFC as a power puncher, looking to knock his opponents out almost immediately. But Team Alpha Male has done a great job in terms of crafting him into a complete mixed martial artist. He's a guy that's able to go out there and stalk his opponents and utilize combinations to open up opportunities for him to land his power shots, but he even utilizes some solid grappling to mix things up and make it look good enough for the judges. His takedown defense has improved tremendously as well, and his ability to just keep his opponents at bay and allow himself to dictate the pace of a fight usually is what makes him so dangerous. Now, in this matchup against Pereira, both guys are power punchers, guys that like to put power onto their opponents and try to knock them out. But I think it's going to be the slight urgency and aggressiveness advantage that we'll see from the Song Yadong side that should end up getting him this victory. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big Pereira fan, but there's a lot of question marks coming into this fight. 3-fight losing streak. Is he going to try to finally switch up his style and try to be a little bit more aggressive? Or does he come back in as the same Pereira that we know and give up the early rounds and give up output numbers in favor of his opponent and likely find himself behind the ball once the fight gets to the scorecards? Now, we can't blame the Moroz Dvalishvili loss on him too much. Moroz is just fucking Moroz. This guy just goes out there and puts high output on all of his opponents no matter who they are. But still, the way Pereira normally fights, I see this fight in favor of Song Yadong, considering that he likely will be the more aggressive of the two, be able to stay busy enough with his kicks, win some of the pocket exchanges even. I feel like this could be Song Yadong's time to finally break through to the next level. So I'm going to go with Yadong here. Line has been, a little bit of a roller coaster. We've seen them at -110. I've seen Song down to +120 earlier. Now he's back to -105. I feel there might be some fight week love coming on Pereira because people are just so familiar with him. And as long as they're not too turned off by the 3-fight losing streak that he's currently on, we might even be able to get Song Yadong at a better number. I don't have a ton of confidence here. This is by no means a lock of the night on Song Yadong, but I feel like if we can get a good enough number on the odds, he might be worth a shot here as an underdog. So give me Song and Song by decision. All right, moving over to the welterweight division, we got Gilbert Burns coming in at +140, taking on Jack Della Maddalena, who comes in at -160. Now, for the longest time, I've talked about Gilbert Burns being a little bit overrated. I think he's been a little bit overachieving in some of the fights, but when you really go back and nitpick his fights, you can see that, he's winning the fights that he should win, and then he's losing the fights that you would expect him to lose. A lot of people... I don't want to shit on Gilbert Burns because I feel like every time I break down his fights, people feel like I'm shitting on him. I don't mean to. Obviously, his striking is far improved compared to what he first was showcasing when he made his UFC debut. He's known for his high-level BJJ black belt, but he's only submitted 2 opponents in the last 5 years. He takes opponents to the ground and he grinds them out, but has really not shown much of a submission threat, especially against guys like Jorge Masvidal and guys that are kind of past their prime at this point of their career. And those are the guys that he's beating. The Wonderboy Thompsons, the guys that he's easily able to take to the ground and grind them out. Even the Wonderboy Thompson fight, he was losing on the feet, and makes sense, but if it wasn't for the takedowns, he'd likely have lost that fight. The Jorge Masvidal fight, Masvidal couldn't stop a takedown for his life. Burns wins that fight. Burns is getting up there in age too. He's 38 years old. I think he's soon to be 39, a few months away from his 38th birthday. But still a guy that I believe relies on the takedowns to get his wins a little bit too much. If opponents are able to stop the takedowns and keep fights in the striking realm, he might be in some shit. Again, he has some good strikes of his own, but I think whenever he's fighting fighters that are technically better than him in the striking realm, he will end up falling short against those guys. Now, speaking of technically better strikers, we got Jack Della Maddalena here, who has come close to losing this crazy 16-fight winning streak that he's currently on. Obviously, the most notable one against that short notice replacement in Basil Hafiz, who was able to have some success with his grappling and holding Jack down. But I think that we've seen solid improvements from Jack over at least his last fight against Kevin Holland, where he didn't even allow Holland to get close to any of the 4 takedown attempts that Holland attempted that night. I think Maddalena is a little bit more aware of the possible takedown attempts that are going to come for him, especially after what we saw in the Hafez fight. He's doing a good job in terms of maintaining his range, and then when he enters in for his combinations, gets off on his strikes and pivots right away out so that his opponents are unable to change levels and look to get him to the ground. I think this is going to be very important for him, as not even in this matchup, but moving forward against guys that are going to be looking to take him to the ground and keep him from his, in my opinion, top 5 striking skill set that he brings to the table. I think that Maddalena should win this fight. I think that this is a matchup where we'll see Burns starting to show the decline in his career and showcasing that he can't compete with the guys that are deserving of being in the top 5 to top 10 of the welterweight division. This is a perfect fight for Maddalena to, I believe he should be able to stop the takedowns, and I believe he should be able to dictate the pace of this fight in the striking realm, and I think that eventually opens up a knockout opportunity for him, probably in the 2nd or 3rd round. Maddalena is the far superior striker. I have no doubt about that. It's the ground game that a lot of people are going to be harping on, thinking that Burns should be able to implement it without too much issue. He might be able to land a takedown, might be able to land 2, but I think as this fight gets into deeper waters, it's going to get harder for him to land those takedowns or even to hold down Maddalena, and that will allow Maddalena to operate at the distance that he feels most comfortable, and that is the striking realm. So give me Maddalena here, and I think he goes out there, deals with the grappling onslaught pretty well early, and then eventually starts to take over with his strikes, and eventually finishes Gilbert Burns with a combination, maybe to the body, maybe to the head, but I think he knocks him out in the 2nd or 3rd round. All right, this is a big-time welterweight matchup here as we have Kevin Holland coming in at -125, taking on the UFC debut of Michael Venom Page, who comes in at +105. Now, if you're thinking about any matchup that Michael Page could have had in his UFC debut, it doesn't get better than this, with Kevin Holland willingly looking to go out there and strike with him. Now, Holland is coming off of a loss to Jack Della Maddalena last time around in a fight where he was unable to implement his height and reach advantage and his long distance striking, as Maddalena was easily able to crash the pocket consistently enough to hurt Kevin Holland and make it look good enough for the judges for Maddalena to get his hand raised there. Holland normally does a good job in terms of maintaining his range, using his sniper-like strikes to touch up his opponents and potentially finish them. And he's been trying to implement his BJJ black belt. I just don't know if his wrestling is good enough to get the higher level guys to the ground so that he can try to work that style, just as we saw in the Maddalena fight. Holland is a solid fighter, but in my opinion, more so deserving of being a top 7 to 15 welterweight rather than a top 5 welterweight. I don't think he's skilled enough to at least crack that range. I still think this is a guy that could suffer from some takedown defense and getting up issues that we saw during his Apex run against guys like against Derek Brunson, against Marvin Vettori. That's something to worry about with Kevin Holland. With Michael Venom Page, 7-1 over his last 8 fights. That loss that he suffered was at the hands of Logan Storley, who, a very close fight. We saw Page land more damage there, but it seemed like the judges were favoring Storley's takedowns and control a little bit more. But Page is a devastating striker. He went from kneeing a guy's skull and shattering it several years back to last time around shattering a guy's kneecap with a perfectly timed placed leg kick that Gayoti Yamauchi took right on his kneecap, and you can see it shatter almost immediately. The amount of power Page is able to generate because of his precision and accuracy and speed and timing is insane. Obviously, takedown defense is something that he needs to continuously work on. He's 37 years old, so he's getting up there in age as well. I don't know if he's going to be able to improve it enough to really be a welterweight contender, but as a guy that can go out there and still have some very fun matchups. I hope that the UFC does continue to match him up the way they did this weekend so that he can go out there and actually showcase his striking prowess rather than having to deal with guys that are continuously looking to take him to the mat. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be leaning on Kevin Holland to have learned a lesson like when he fought Stephen Thompson in a fight where he said, all right, we're gonna strike this out. And that obviously favored Wonderboy Thompson. He'll not want to do that here against Michael Venom Page, but even if he looks to do that here against Page, will he be successful with it? I don't think his wrestling is good enough to be successful with it. I think we'll see Page showcase enough good footwork, good movement, good distance management, and good enough takedown defense to stay upright so that he can use his striking advantage to win this matchup. I do like Page here to touch up Kevin Holland, maybe even knock him out in the second or third round. I think Holland will try to compete with him in the striking early, then he'll try to rely on his wrestling, and when his wrestling folds, he's going to leave openings for Page to take advantage and eventually find that knockout. Just give me Michael Page by knockout. All right, co-main event reminder, this is a 5-round non-title fight. But it's just the fact that Dustin, the Diamond Poirier, is fighting on this card. So the UFC is like, you know what? We'll toss you 5 rounds. He comes in at plus 185 as he takes streaking prospect Benoit Saint-Denis, who comes in at minus 220. Now, Dustin Poirier, it's been very weird for him leading up to this matchup. If you guys remember a couple weeks back, he made a tweet about how he didn't sign a contract for this matchup. And I think that was more so his plea to try to get some more money out of the UFC. And it seems like the UFC was able to do exactly that. Poirier has talked about the fact that he does not want this fight and took it just because I guess the UFC made the honeypot sweet enough for him. You know what I mean? I think they paid him enough money to finally go out there and do that because it seemed like Poirier was firmly entrenched in legacy fights at this point in time, right? Like going from fighting guys like Justin Gaethje and Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor to fighting a young, hungry prospect like Benoit Saint-Denis is not the type of arc that I believe Poirier expected for himself coming into 2024. But here he is. So let's talk about Poirier as a fighter. Last time around in July, getting knocked out by Justin Gaethje in the BMF title fight, and showcasing that he might be on the decline now. He is a guy that normally relies on his striking to put combinations together to hurt his opponents and possibly knock them out or choke them out later on in fights. But it's usually when he gets pressured by heavy grapplers that he ends up finding a way out of fights. We saw Almabaev, who's been unstoppable in that aspect. And we even saw Charles Oliveira once he was able to get the back of Poirier. Poirier was unable to stop that rear naked choke and that submission from happening. Poirier is tough. He's a gamer. He is a guy that goes out there and fights his heart out every single time. But when he fights somebody with a bad stylistic matchup for him or a bad stylistic puzzle for him, he usually folds. Like, I don't want to say he folds like he gives up or anything, but I think it's just easier for his opponents to find the finish when Poirier finds himself in a bad spot, especially in the grappling realm. And good God, does he have a very aggressive grappler that he's fighting this weekend that will likely look to put him in that spot early in this matchup. Benoit Saint-Denis had a very horrible UFC debut back in 2021, I believe it was, when we saw Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos absolutely butcher him and could have had that fight stopped numerous times. It even got the referee pretty much fired from having any form of UFC projects or assignments in the future because of how bad that fight was. But Saint-Denis has bounced back emphatically. 5 straight wins, all of them by finish, goes out there and just puts the pressure on his opponents, absolutely breaks them with his forward movement, his leg kicks to the body, the elbows that he tries to hit when he gets in close. But he really does his best work when he's able to engage in the clinch. From the clinch, he doesn't usually get the traditional takedown. He likes to push his opponents up against the cage, work to the back of his opponents, and then from there, eventually get his hooks in and sink in the rear naked choke. He is unstoppable with his pressure. The guy just continuously moves forward and does not take no for an answer. His striking could obviously use a little bit of improvements, but I think he's found the key in terms of just smashing the body kick, smash the head kick as much as possible from the open stance until he can close that distance enough to get the clinch going or get a takedown attempt going so that he can get to his jiu-jitsu, which he is most effective with. And I think that's truly where Dustin Poirier struggles. We'll see Saint-Denis engage in that clinch without too much issue. And I think from there, it should be a Benoit Saint-Denis fight. I think within the first 10 minutes, we see Saint-Denis break down Poirier. And Poirier will showcase good enough takedown defense and good enough grappling defense early. But the constant pressure, constant forward movement, and constant aggression from Saint-Denis is ultimately going to cause Poirier issues here. And again, remember, this is not the fight Poirier wants. Poirier does not want to be fighting young, hungry guys. This guy wants to go out there and fight the Justin Gaethjes of the world, the Conor McGregors of the world, guys that will make him money and he can actually be competitive with. I don't know if he can be competitive with Saint-Denis. He's the better striker, don't get me wrong. But what's striking if you're unable to keep that distance? And Saint-Denis is not going to allow him to keep that distance. So give me Saint-Denis here. I think he finds a submission within the first 2 rounds. I feel pretty damn good about it. It seems like a lot of people do as well, considering that Saint-Denis went from like minus 150 to minus 225 now. Got to get in on that before he hits that minus 300 range. All right, that leads us to our main event, bantamweight title fight between Sugar Sean O'Malley, who comes in at minus 300 as he rematches the last guy to give him a loss in Marlon Chito Vera, who comes in at plus 250. Now, let's start off on the Sean O'Malley side, who, again, his last loss did come to Marlon Vera. But since that fight has gone out there and gone 5-0 with 1-0 contest sprinkled in there as well. The majority of his wins coming by knockout. But he did have the toughest fight of his career against Petr Yan last 2 fights ago, where he was able to land enough damage late in that fight to win that fight. I believe he won the first round just off of volume. Yan won the second round, but then in the third round, a lot of people thought that Yan deserved to win that round, but it seemed like Sugar was landing the optically more pleasing strikes to the judges, which is why they ultimately gave it to him in his favor. His next fight was for the title against Aljamain Sterling, I believe, back in August. And that was a fight where we saw Sean utilize solid discipline, footwork, and patience to eventually open up that shot in the second round that would earn him the bantamweight title. But it's the way he set up that strike that allowed him to get the win. He knew that I think it was a front kick up the middle, once he threw that, that would cause Aljamain Sterling to react in a certain way, and he overextended with the punch, and you can see his reaction. Go back and watch the fight. You can see Aljamain Sterling's reaction when he misses the strike, and he's like, oh shit. Like, he can see it. He can see the punch coming, see how he got the trap sprung on him. And we see Sean O'Malley land that straight shot down the pipe and follow up with some ground and pound to eventually put a stamp on that matchup and win that bantamweight title. It was a thing of beauty. And that's what Sean O'Malley is great at. He has good knockout power, but he has a great knack for setting up traps and springing them on his opponents and trying to knock them out. Often he relies too heavily on that knockout power to try to get his wins, which will eventually come back to bite him in the ass against guys that are, durable, or guys that could go out there and make him try to show more aspects of his game. But it's worked for him thus far, so credit to him. Now, his opponent this weekend, Marlon Chito Vera, definitely not deserving of a title shot, but it all has to do with the storyline and the fact that Sean O'Malley's last loss came to Marlon Vera. Add in the fact that Chito lost to Corey Sandhagen 2 fights ago. Add in the fact that Pedro Munhoz maybe should have won the decision against Marlon Vera. Again, I scored that for Marlon Vera, but still, very close fight. He's not deserving of the title shot, but I get it. Storyline baked into it is what it is. We just have to take it for what it is. Now, Marlon Vera is a guy that usually struggles in 3-round fights, but thrives in 5-round fights. He's a slow starter, but once he's able to get his feet under him, once he finds his groove, once he finds his rhythm, he's able to start taking over in later rounds, which ultimately allows him to finish opponents late or go out there and win decisions just off of damage that he's able to incur over the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. The only opponent recently that's been able to defeat him over 5 rounds was Corey Sandhagen, who has a great output, great unorthodox striking, great striking overall in terms of his ability to put output and combinations together and keep Vera kind of frozen, kind of staring at him and questioning whether he should be throwing his own strikes. So great work from Corey Sandhagen there. But normally we see Vera very aggressive late in fights. And that's where my question mark comes here against Sean O'Malley. Now, we know O'Malley is the better technical striker. That's without a doubt. Can he sustain that over 25 minutes? Can he continuously land big enough shots on Vera for the judges to see it in his favor? Is he going to implement grappling? Because if he does, is he good enough from that top position to stay out of the aggressive guard of Chito Vera? And once Cheeto gets his groove and starts letting go with his own strikes late in that matchup, can Sean O'Malley take that? Can he deal with, deep water Marlon Vera? That's a big question mark. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant on this minus 300. Everybody keeps talking about how the first fight went. The first fight only lasted 4 minutes. Sean O'Malley was uninjured for 2.5 of those minutes. And yes, he was looking good, but he wasn't running away with the fight. And Marlon Vera has never been finished. Marlon Vera has fought some of the heaviest hitters that this division has to offer and has never been knocked down. In 10 years of fighting with the UFC, never been knocked down. You're talking about guys like John Lineker that were able to put big punches on him. Jose Aldo, who were able to put big punches on him. Never dropped him. Is Sean O'Malley going to be the guy that drops him or finishes him? And if he doesn't, can he do it good enough over 25 minutes? Now, my prediction is still Sean. I believe his wizardry in the striking, I believe his game planning and ability to execute it will allow him to put together a good enough game plan to outwork Marlon Vera, who gets caught looking a little bit too much, who gives up too many minutes to his opponents. But you got to wonder, once this fight gets into deep waters, what if Marlon Vera just hits that extra gear, has that extra bit of motivation, considering all of the shit talk between him and Sean O'Malley over the last couple of years. So I think I'm going to pass on this fight as a whole. I think there's a possible live entry on Marlon Vera going into the third round, depending on how he looks, if he's still conscious. But overall, I think we'll see O'Malley land enough big damage, see him stay safe enough late. I think he wins this fight by decision. So maybe target him to win by decision would be the better way to go. But yeah, Vera's never been knocked out. That's a big thing that a lot of people are overlooking here. And the fact that this is going 25 minutes rather than just 15. So just open. I know a lot of people already have O'Malley circled saying he's a free square this weekend, but just open your mind to the possibility of him not getting the early knockout. What does this fight look like otherwise? I'm still picking O'Malley, still picking him to win by decision, but I want no part of this fight. And still, Sean O'Malley, just until his next fight, until he fights Merab Dvalishvili. And Dvalishvili probably ends up winning that fight. But we'll talk about that whenever that gets matched up. But on this day, UFC 299, Sean O'Malley, and still by decision over Marlon Vera. There you guys go. I felt like I got into a lot of these matchups very in depth. Excuse me. Very passionate about a lot of these fights. There's a lot of competitive matchups, a lot of high-level matchups. This is one of the best pay-per-views we've had in a very long time, and I cannot wait to watch it this weekend. Remember, there is a ton of other great content for UFC 299 coming out this week on the YouTube channel. Make sure you guys stay tuned for that. I will also be dropping a regional breakdown. I'm still trying to figure out which one it is. If you guys want to let me know in the comments section below which one you would like to hear from, whether it's PFL Europe, LFA 178, or ACA 172, which video would you guys like for that card or one of those cards? Vote below, and I will break it down for you guys for free on the YouTube page. I will be breaking down all of those in written form on the Patreon page. So if you want access to all three of those regional shows, make sure you guys check it out in the Patreon. Otherwise, I will do one regional public breakdown on the YouTube channel for one of those three cards. Again, vote for it below. PFL Europe is on Thursday. LFA is on Friday. ACA is Saturday morning. So keep that in mind as well. All right. Appreciate you guys. Love you guys. And I will see you tomorrow for the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates. Peace.